The blue paper received an email with some disturbing photographs. They showed what appeared to be gray water coming out of the mangroves in Marathon. The sender alluded to possible sewage coming out of a shallow injection well near the city's wastewater plant. Pretty soon we were in touch with a group of Florida Keys residents alarmed by deteriorating nearshore waters around Marathon. They believe the use of shallow injection wells for treated sewage effluent is flooding the harbor with too many harmful nutrients, and sometimes much worse. For more than a year now, we've followed their efforts to go beyond government apathy to discover what's really in that green and sometimes stinky water. To show us what they're concerned about, Mike and Jerry Tinnell take us out on their boat for a tour of Marathon's Boot Key Harbor. The sea bottom appears brown and mucky, the turtle grasses covered with algae, and at low tide the mangrove roots are dripping with green goo. To be sure, this is very different from the nearshore waters outside Marathon. This footage was captured right off the shores of Key West by Blue Paper reporter Amber Nolan. Sandy bottom and green turtle grass is what it's supposed to look like. It's easy to see why the locals would be concerned about the threat to this amazing environment.
Why is it so important for you?
The whole Keys is important to me. What happens in Marathon doesn't necessarily stay in Marathon. It drifts down here, so we're swimming in the same effluent as Marathon folks.
But I grew up here between the 60s, 70s, and 80s, off and on. Oh, beautiful. It was a lot clearer. It was a lot more turquoise.
And, I mean, when I first came down here, it was crystal. I can't remember the last time that I saw it really clear here. It just seems to be getting progressively worse.
It's much worse in Marathon now than it was years ago.
But I see tourists, they come with their brand new package of masks and swim fins and snorkel, and they put them on and they go into the water, and a few minutes later they come walking out and they throw them up on the beach. And they say, does it ever get clear? And I said, well, actually no. I could run my boat beyond the swim buoys when I first came down here, and I could watch the rays scatter out of my way on the bottom. And no, you can't see it. No.
Mike takes us to this spot in the mangroves in Boot Key Harbor, where the bottom disappears beneath a layer of strange hazy white liquid.
One day I was over about to go in, and there was a young lady that was taking water samples. So I said, and I explained the situation, how I've noticed that the water seems to be getting more and more cloudy. The visibility is just terrible. And I said, what's causing that? Because I have a friend down in Big Pine, and we fish together. Water's clear there. I have a friend in Tavernier. We snorkel together up there. Water's clear there. But it's not here. And she says, well, it's because of the pollution up on the west coast of Florida, Fort Myers. And she says the plumes and the currents bring it right down here to Marathon. I says, it's hard to believe that the currents could be that specific. Oh, well, they are.
Only Marathon.
Only in Marathon. And I'm like, well, this is not going anywhere. So I thank
And this was someone who works for the city to take samples?
Yeah, I would assume so. She was.
Yeah, years ago they used to advertise the Keys as having crystal clear cobalt blue water. Now, with things changing and all the algae, they advertise the Keys as having emerald green water. So the advertising people have adapted. And the tourists think it's great. Green's, it's a pretty color, but it's not.
Tired of their government's unconvincing explanations about the water around Marathon, Mike, Jerry, Don DeMaria, and over 1,000 other friends of the Lower Keys decided to start paying out of their own pockets for lab testing. They were hoping to finally learn what was really going on in that green and troubled water. and they managed to get the attention of a world-renowned marine biologist, Dr. Brian LaPointe. The suspicion was that somehow wastewater effluent was making its way into the harbor. But how to verify that?
Water just turned brown and it stunk. It was horrible. It was obvious something was going wrong. So we didn't really know what to do. We talked to a scientist at Harbor Branch. He explained to us we really need to test for sucralose, the artificial sweetener. It's a real stable molecule. It doesn't break down. It's easy to test for. And the only way to get in the water is to sue humans. If you find elevated levels of sucralose, you can assume that it's a direct human impact.
Yeah.
And the levels we found at Crane Point were extremely high. And the ones at Boot Key were even higher. We gave all the results to Brian LaPointe. He looked at them and, he gave us his opinion on it.
What did he say?
From there, he said they were extremely high. They're some of the highest he's ever seen. So there was no doubt in his mind that it was human impact in the form of sewage.
But how was that possible? According to city manager George Garrett, Marathon's treated sewage effluent is as pure as drinking water.
Our sewage is treated to AWP standards, which is virtually drinking water standards.
In fact, a whistleblower's report and a look at historical records paints quite a different picture, showing Marathon's sewage plants have often been taken to the brink by excessive volumes of sewage, saltwater intrusion, and malfunction. This is a letter of resignation by a former sewer plant manager. Peak flows, he complains, are at times over 500% of design capacity. He concludes, frankly, the situation is untenable. Records show multiple findings by DEP inspectors of unauthorized bypass of filtration and disinfection, with high potential for water quality and health impacts. One of those potentially hazardous discharges lasted for 6 weeks, another one for over 2 months. DEP records show that at times, Marathon plants have discharged 20,000 fecal coliform units per 100 milliliters, way above the maximum allowed of 800 per 100 milliliters. A whistleblower wrote to the City Commission reporting recurring incompetence in plant management, which he or she said included directing employees to use previous acceptable monitoring data to be copied over actual data in order to hide problems in the sewage treatment process. According to a source who is a local wastewater professional, a simple malfunction in chlorination could result in injection of effluent with high levels of E. coli. The water will appear gray and have a strong smell of sewage, he says.
Yeah, I know what sewage smells like. This
And then
wasn't just rotten seaweed or anything. It was sewage. I was diving by Crane Point, which was fairly close to the shallow injection wells. 2 days later, my eyes started hurting quite a bit, and a couple of days after that, it got really bad where I had to go to the hospital and get treatment for it. And I thought I was going to lose my eye. It got so bad. But you could actually smell the sewage where I was diving. So I have to think it had a lot to do with my eye infection.
The city has not responded to our request for comment, but public records reveal the city's position. Officially, what Don DeMaria is describing can't happen. The city has assured DEP that its wastewater effluent is injected below a confining layer made of non-porous aquicludes that inhibit upward transport of flow to the surface. City Manager George Garrett explained that this has been the basis for FDEP allowing shallow wells in the first place. We decided to drive to Fort Pierce and interview Dr. LaPointe to find out whether or not the data collected shows that in spite of the city's position, treated sewage effluent is contaminating the harbor. We showed Dr. LaPointe the video footage we'd captured in Boot Key Harbor. It turned into a teaching moment for a student working in the lab.
So we're looking at Boot Key Harbor in Marathon, and some of this is a site where I found, are you ready? Almost about 3,000 nanograms per liter of sucralose. Now, in our work here in the IRL, we get 100, 200, up to 400, 500 in the main stem. but you can see all the algae overgrowth, okay?
I'd love to see those.
So we've been very concerned about the effluent from the shallow well injection of treated wastewater. You can just see this algal bloom mat is covering the bottom here. Look at the epiphytes on the turtle grass, right? So this is a heavily nutrient impacted area we're looking at. And my water samples show pretty high very high nutrients at this site. And this is where we found about 3,000 nanograms per liter of sucralose. So it was very clear to us we were probably seeing a very poorly diluted plume from the shallow well that was coming up and discharging through submarine groundwater discharge into the surface waters. This is a result of very, very high nutrients. Typically, when there's a lot of sewage or fertilizer in the water. So yeah, this to me looks like a bacterial bloom on the bottom. I've seen similar phenomena in very organic, rich, eutrophic environments where you can have, for example, like sulfur-reducing bacteria. You got to be careful in these environments. This whole thing, and you know this, MRSA, also Vibrio vulnificus, you know. When you have...
What's that?
That's Vibrio is a bacterium. That is particularly harmful to people with any kind of liver disease. They can die within 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah.
And what happened when you tried to reach out with your findings?
We brought them the findings, showed it to them, and said, this is what's happening. Even tried to write to all the newer city council after they were elected into place, and I think ultimately my email got blocked.
Really?
Yeah.
In fact, an email obtained by the Blue Paper shows that behind the scenes, Marathon's city manager was dismissing their reports as pseudoscience. But the reports did touch a nerve at the EPA. At the urging of local marine sanctuary officials, the agency unlocked a grant and commissioned Penn State University to investigate the impact of the shallow well wastewater injections at the Buki Harbor plant. We found Penn State professor Dr. Lee Kump collecting data from a series of monitoring wells he and his team had drilled around the Buki Harbor sewer plant.
Here that squeeze and release the water, and so it pumps it into here, and then we collect samples.
What's the situation now? There's a problem that you're trying to solve?
Well, I think there was uncertainty about the fate of the wastewater.
Dr. Kump's findings debunked the city's impermeable Q-layer theory. Like Dr. LaPointe, Dr. Kump used sucralose as an indicator of sewage effluent. Dye, injected along with the sewage effluent, was also used as a tracer. He found that the treated effluent quickly rises to the surface and ends up in the harbor.
So the groundwater path tends to be from the point of injection upwards, because the wastewater is lighter, less dense than the salty groundwater, so it tends to move up and outwards. The limestone here is very permeable. It's like Swiss cheese, and so seawater from both sides fills the ground, and it has a chance to find the cracks and the holes through those systems and permeate through those layers. So I think today, with work like ours, it's clear now that the effectiveness of those Q layers, at least the upper ones, as aquatards, is not high. What we're finding is that the combination of the wastewater and rainwater creates a fairly substantial low salinity lens at the surface, and a path along which the wastewater plume migrates to, in this case, to the nearest water body, whether it be Buki Harbor or the bay.
Now, with scientific proof that Marathon's injection wells create a direct path for sewage effluent into the harbor, the question becomes, how much nutrients are in that effluent, and how much is too much for the ecosystems surrounding Marathon's shores.
It's not just the water, because nobody really cares about the water, it's what it contains. And in particular, there's been concern about the nutrients in that wastewater, nitrogen and phosphorus. There is removal of phosphorus and nitrogen in the subsurface, but it's not complete.
Dr. LaPointe agrees.
The thing is that these wastewater treatment plants are removing nutrients to a very high degree. So, but there's still nutrients coming out, probably a couple milligrams per liter. I don't know how much. But in these environments, 1 or 2 milligrams per liter is a lot. So the concentration of nitrogen that can result in blooms like this, do you remember what that concentration is? That's okay. Your test isn't for a while, so you'll know it before your test arrives. So this is very interesting because it's about 14 micrograms per liter, or that equates to 1 micromolar of reactive nitrogen. Okay.
And for us people that don't know anything, that's a small amount?
So if that shallow well is discharging highly treated effluent, AWT, at 1 milligram per liter, and I don't know that to be the case, but let's just say 1 milligram per liter, that is about 70 micromolar. Okay, and we're talking 1 micromolar would do that. We measured, I think, about 2 micromolar, between 1 and 2 micromolar, ammonium and nitrate.
You're saying the samples that you took?
The samples we took at that site A where we measured.
So this is after it goes through groundwater and makes it to the
dilution.
surface?
After dilution.
It was still...
It's still too high. Plus, they're sending a lot of water south from the Everglades into the Florida Bay, Florida Keys region. And those flows are they're basically elevating the background levels. So everything now that we're discharging, it makes it more difficult to dilute it below that 1 micromolar. You understand?
So we're getting everything from Mickey Mouse Land too down here. But it doesn't really bloom and turn that green brownish color until it hits the Keys.
All the halo zone testing that the sanctuary's been doing for 10 straight years shows that only Marathon's got the declining water quality. So if it were coming down the Florida Bay and hitting all of the Keys, wouldn't that be, equally bad everywhere, not just in one particular area?
When it hits the Keys, it's nutrient rich. There's the banks that it comes up on. Heats up the water when it gets shallow, so we get the heat, the nutrients. It's a perfect storm.
What we need to actually do is take care of our own backyard, which is here, the Keys. We gotta take care of what we can take care of.
We gotta clean up our own backyard before we go pointing fingers at others.
So what is the solution? Aside from Marathon, all of the other dense population centers in the Keys are now using deep injection wells. Their sewage is injected 2,000, 3,000 feet underground. The belief is that any excess nutrients or hazardous contaminants caused by mishaps at the plants will be cleaned up while traveling through those thousands of feet of rock. Deep wells are mandatory for injection of over 1 million gallons per day. Exhibit F1C of the Wastewater Master Plan for the Florida Keys shows that Marathon was supposed to erect a regional sewage treatment plant with a capacity of 1 to 2 million gallons per day. But Marathon decided to use 5 smaller plants, connected to 12 shallow injection wells. But those deep wells cost millions of dollars. We wanted to know if there are any indications that they truly make a difference. Key West has 2 of them. We looked for a place comparable to Boot Key Harbor in the Key West area near the sewage treatment plant. Like Boot Key, Garrison Bight in Key West is almost landlocked with a very small access channel. It has 3 marinas that accept liveaboards, a boatyard, houses on all sides, and a highway, the very same US 1 that passes along Boot Key Harbor. We went to see if the Garrison Bight shallows were going to be covered with brown muck. We are no experts, but that does look a lot better than Boot Key Harbor. Immediately outside of Garrison Bight, even closer to the sewage treatment plant in the mooring field, the sea bottom is covered by lush turtle grass meadows. We asked Jerry to test for sucralose in the waters near Key West's deep injection wells. The results showed only 37.5 nanograms per liter versus nearly 3,000 in Boot Key Harbor. While Penn State research was exposing the ineffectiveness of any confining Q layer in Marathon, the city applied for DEP permits to expand the use of shallow wells at the Boot Key Harbor plant. In its DEP application, the city claimed there was no evidence or concern that the injected effluent results in a violation of state water quality standards, and again represented the debunked confining Q layer theory.
I think you can have all the data in the world that you want. Brian has plenty, and he's been dealing with it for years. And you present it, you go to meetings and present it, but unless there's a threat of litigation, someone holding their feet to the fire, you're not going to get any action.
For years, we brought them the findings and said, this is what's happening. Showed it to them. I think it was just ignored. That was, and that's why it ultimately ended up in a Clean Water Act lawsuit.
This is supposed to be a national marine sanctuary. Florida outstanding waters, area of critical concern. We ought to be able to clean up our waste here. This is the country to put a man on the moon, 1969. Here we are, how many years later, we can't clean up our own waste. Sanctuary, it's a joke. It's an embarrassment.